Now that I've sewn half the blanket together, I'm going to show you how to add borders. When you come to make yours, you'll actually be adding a border to the finished complete blanket, but it's easier to show you with a smaller piece of fabric for the video. So I'm going to zoom in now and show you the technique. But what you're going to need is your edging colour, and I've chosen sand for mine, a pair of circular needles with a long cable, and some stitch markers. And the circular needles need to be half a size or a size smaller than the needle size you use to make your blanket. Normally when you're picking up stitches along a vertical edge, you don't pick up every single row because it makes the edge flare out. However, because the tension in these pieces is quite square, I'm actually going to be able to pick up more stitches than I would normally. So normally I would pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows or 2 stitches for every 3 rows. In this case, I'm going to pick up maybe 5 stitches for every 6 rows. So the rate of pickup is a little bit higher. Once I get to the top edge of the piece, I'm going to put a stitch marker on my needle. And then I'm going to pick up and knit a stitch from the corner. And you can see I've pulled my cable out now because that makes it a lot easier. So that's my corner stitch. Then I'm going to add another stitch marker. And now when I'm working, I will know exactly where my corner is, and I'll repeat that process for each corner. And then next what we need to do is pick up along the top edge. Picking up stitches along the top edge is more straightforward because what you're doing is just picking up one stitch above every stitch on that top edge. So as long as you just make sure you don't pick up between the stitches as well, then you'll be absolutely fine. If in doubt, just count the number of stitches that you've picked up and make sure that it matches the 47 stitches per square. So I'm going to start that now. So I'm going to miss this first stitch because that's the corner, it's already counted for that one. So there's one stitch picked up. When you're picking up along the cast off edge, it's quite simple because you can just use the plaits that are at the top of the cast off as a guide. So I'll keep doing that all the way along until I've completed picking up along the entire row of the top edge of the blanket. Once you've picked up and knitted all the way around the edges of the blanket, you're going to start working in moss stitch until you get almost to the first corner marker. So I'm going to do the last few stitches. So I've got a knit stitch and a purl stitch. And so you've got a knit stitch presenting as the next stitch before the corner marker, and that's what you want. But what you're actually going to do is work a knit front and back into this stitch to make an extra stitch at the corner. Slip your marker, then work your next knit front and back into the corner stitch. And now take your marker and you're going to place it between your original corner stitch and the stitch that you've just increased. So to do that, I need to undo the locking stitch marker, slide it between the 2 stitches and relock it. And now I just continue working in moss stitch, starting with a knit stitch until I get to 1 stitch before the next corner marker, and then I repeat that process. And you can see now there's just 1 stitch again at that corner. So I'm back to the same corner, and this time I want to work around without any increases. And so what I'm going to do is continue my moss stitch right up to the marker. So on the last round that was a purl stitch, so I'll work it as a knit stitch to keep the moss stitch correct. The next stitch was a knit stitch, so I'll purl it. And then here's my stitch that I increased last time. It looks a little bit like a purl stitch, and I'm going to knit that stitch, slip my marker, knit the corner stitch again because we always knit that corner stitch, and then after the marker, which I slip again, That's that other increase, and I'll knit that as well. And so you can see the next stitch presents as a knit, so I'll purl it and so on, and I'll do that on every corner for a round without increases. Once you've done your plain round, you'll do another increase round. So work to 1 stitch before the corner as before, but this time you need to work a purl front and back because it's presenting as a knit stitch. So work your purl front and back, slip your marker, and then work knit front and back. And again, once you've done that, you need to move this marker in between these 2 stitches. When you've worked all 8 rounds of the blanket edging, your corners of your blanket should look like this, with a line of knit stitches running diagonally from the corner. What you then need to do is to begin your cast-offs. Your cast-offs begin in the middle of a blanket square. And if you've ever had a problem with a cast-off looking a little bit gappy when you start it in the middle of a row, there's a trick to make this better. So my cast-offs begin with a knit stitch presenting, and I'm going to cast off in moss stitch. So I want to work a purl stitch. So what I will actually do is work a purl front and back into this stitch to increase 1 stitch at the beginning of the cast off, and then I will actually cast that original stitch over the increase. So that's now the beginning of my cast off, and as you can see, there isn't the same kind of slanting gap that you normally see at the beginning of cast off. So for the rest of the casting off, you work in pattern, so you cast off in moss stitch, and when you get to the corners, you need to treat those a little bit differently as well. So I'll show you that next. So I've worked my cast off to the first corner now, and I've stopped 1 stitch before the marker, just like before. And what I'm actually going to do now is increase, so that as my cast offs go around the corner, there's a few more stitches available for them to work. So first of all, I'm going to do a knit front and back increase in the last stitch before the corner. And then I'm going to put this increase stitch back onto the left needle so that I can cast off as usual on the remaining 2 stitches. Oh, it's a little bit fiddly. And now I'm just going to slip that increase stitch onto my needle and cast it off. Then I'm going to get rid of my marker because I don't want it anymore. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to do a knit front and back increase. Slip my increase back to the left needle and cast off as before, then slip that increase over and cast that off. Now I can just continue casting off as normal. Oh, my stitch marker flew away. So I've got a purl stitch to work here. Cast that off. And I'll do a few stitches now so that you can see what the corner looks like once I've worked all the way around it with that increasing. So I've worked my cast off all the way around that corner now and done a few more stitches so that you can see the shape it makes. And as you can see, it gives a really nice shape to the corner. It gives a properly squared off, pointed corner. If you don't do that extra increasing, that's fine, but what will happen is you'll just get a slightly more rounded shape on the corners of your blanket. It's a personal choice and you can do either way, but I prefer to give an extra increase or 2 at these corners so that they get a proper corner point.